Star Trek novels are an absolute treasure trove. Star Trek is, and always will be, made primarily for the screen, yet the books add layers that can enhance the overall experience. Star Trek books, especially the standalone books, which are the majority of them, can be perfect little gems for anyone that wants to pick up a story anytime with no homework being required. Stick around as I dive into what makes these books so special, why I enjoy them so much, and why I hope you might enjoy them as well. And at the end, I'll give you some recommendations. One of the great things about Star Trek novels is that they go beyond the shows and films. Live-action episodes or movies have to wrap up in 45 minutes if it's a show, or a couple of hours if it's a movie. Budgets, special effects, and studio executives all impose limits on what stories can be told on screen. But in the books, the only limits are that of the imagination of the writer. Writers are free to explore bizarre alien cultures, create new characters, introduce intricate moral dilemmas, or the inner thoughts of beloved core characters in intimate and profound ways. They can also have fun by following up on characters and aliens that you only saw in 1 or 2 episodes or movies. And the action can be epic: space battles spanning star systems, mind-bending time travel twists, first contacts that feel truly alien and wondrous. Sure, a little suspense can be lost because you know going in that the main characters won't die, but they do get in perilous situations, and it's fun to read about how they get themselves out of those situations. When we read about characters that we already know, it's easier to visualize them and hear their voices. While the books still give some character descriptions, not as much effort is needed in setting things up. The setting already exists. Most of the world building has already been done. The writers can jump in with their stories and enrich the characters and deeper their backstories and go beyond what was presented on screen. Personally, I prefer the standalone novels. These are the self-contained adventures, like unfilmed episodes, but with far more depth and detail. You don't need to read 10 other books to understand the setting, and each one concludes without a cliffhanger. That accessibility is perfect for casual fans or newcomers. They're also perfect for seasoned fans like me that just want to go on another adventure with these characters. The sheer volume of these books means readers have almost 900 titles to choose from, and that's not even counting the comic books. That's more content than most people could read in a lifetime. Now, the spigot has slowed down in recent years. There are only a few new Star Trek books released each year, but there are still tons to choose from the existing catalog. There have been countless authors for these books. Many only write one novel. Some are great, others not so much. There are duds to be sure, but most of the repeat authors are excellent. If you've never read a Star Trek book before, I'd probably suggest by starting with one of the recurring writers. Greg Cox is probably my favorite of the bunch. He captures the voices of the characters perfectly. His books seem like genuine Star Trek stories. Greg Cox really seems to understand why Star Trek works, and he's an excellent writer. Diane Duane is good. She's a legend in the Star Trek literary world. Her book, Spock's World, from the late 1980s is a masterpiece, blending hard science with emotional depth as it explores Vulcan culture. If you like Spock, you should read that book. Then there's Peter David, who sadly passed away in May of 2025. He had a knack for humor and heart. His next generation novel, Imzadi, explores the relationship between Riker and Troy. David also has some fun crossovers like Q and Law, where Q clashes with Lwaxana Troi in pure chaotic joy. Most notably, Peter David wrote about 24 New Frontier books about an original crew exclusive to the books of the starship USS Excalibur in the Next Generation era, an excellent accomplishment. Another author to watch is Una McCormack, particularly if you're interested in the newer shows like Discovery or Picard. Her writing is sharp and character-driven. Books like The Last Best Hope, tying into Picard, or her Discovery novels flesh out the characters. She captures character voices quite well. You can almost hear Sir Patrick Stewart narrating. Dayton Ward is another prolific Star Trek writer. You can't go wrong if you pick up a Dayton Ward novel. There are plenty of others. While I personally prefer the standalone books, let's talk a bit about the book canon, because some of the books do tie into other books. The core canon is what's on screen. That's sometimes called the alpha canon. set in stone by the movies and TV creators. The novels, they're often called the beta canon. They are licensed tie-ins officially approved by the studio, but not binding on the studio when they make new movies or shows. Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager relaunch books, relaunch being an unofficial name commonly used, tell stories that take place after those shows have ended. What happened to Voyager after returning to Earth? What happened to Deep Space Nine after the Dominion War? What happened after Riker took command of the Titan? These books tell us those answers. All of that was great fun, although that huge connected beta canon has come to a conclusion with the Coda trilogy books. I honestly didn't care for the Coda trilogy, but the relaunch universe is a massive interconnected canon of its own with some excellent stories to read about. And even the stories that connect with each other, you can usually read the books on their own and still understand what's going on. The relaunch books had to come to a conclusion because the show Star Trek Picard came out. The studio won't allow books to be published that contradict what's on screen, so all new Star Trek books have to align with the new post-Nemesis canon of Picard. But modern Star Trek books still have a lot of freedom to do their own thing. Now, I mentioned earlier that writers can feel free to write pretty much whatever they want without fear of being contradicted later, because if something is contradicted later by what's on screen wins. Sometimes shows or movies overwrite the books. Like the novel Federation by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, that book depicts Zefram Cochrane's warp invention in the post-atomic horror, only for the movie Star Trek First Contact to contradict the events of the book. Another example of this is the book Starfleet Year One, which came out just as the prequel TV show Enterprise was being developed. The book and the series have incompatible visions about early Starfleet. The timing was so close that the book actually includes a disclaimer saying that it's unrelated to the events of Star Trek Enterprise, just to avoid confusion. And you know what? That's okay. We can enjoy different takes on things. Keep the multiverse concept in mind when those contradictions happen, and I think it actually adds to the fun. Pocket Books, now under Gallery Books, has published hundreds of Star Trek novels since the 1970s. With all that content, there are some contradicting stories. Some books contradict each other, and some are contradicted by later shows or movies. And you know what? There are far more adventures in the original 5-year mission than could fit in a 20 or 30-year mission, but that's okay. Fans are smart enough to recognize this and enjoy the books despite the impossibility of one sleek aligned canon. It's pretty simple. When contradictions arise, the screen canon wins, but that's fine. Star Trek embraces a multiverse where alternate versions add fun layers. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations, right folks? Let's talk about one quirky corner of the Star Trek books worth highlighting, and that's the so-called Shatnerverse. A series of novels co-authored by William Shatner himself, with Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who probably actually did the bulk of the writing, if not all of the writing. These books resurrect Captain Kirk into the 24th century after his apparent death in the movie Star Trek Generations. Now, some people criticize these books as being a little bit self-indulgent on William Shatner's part, but personally I love these books, especially The Return. That's the book that brings Kirk back to life in Picard's time. It's a bit over the top and far-fetched even for Star Trek, but my goodness, it's a fun book. For example, in that book, Spock discovers a connection between V'ger and the Borg. The Shatnerverse books are mostly a fun extension of Kirk's legacy that blend action with introspective moments, although the later books aren't quite as strong as the earlier entries. I also enjoy the Star Trek Enterprise novels. In my view, Star Trek Enterprise is the most underrated Star Trek show, and the book tie-ins are often overlooked when people talk about Star Trek novels. One thing I definitely appreciate is that these books retcon Trip Tucker's controversial death in the series finale. In the book The Good That Men Do, it is revealed that Trip's demise was actually faked by Section 31, allowing Trip to survive as a Section 31 agent, contributing to the Federation's early days. While Trip Tucker's fate is rather tragic, it's not as tragic as his useless death in the series finale. The books give us an interesting take on the Romulan War and the rise of the Federation. If you're wondering where to start with Star Trek books, I have a few suggestions. For original series fans, I already mentioned Spock's World, But I would also recommend taking a look at Probe. That's a neat, direct sequel to Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home that goes deeper into that whale probe from the movie, especially what it does after it leaves Earth. The book Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens is excellent. I'd say that's an iconic Star Trek novel, a great place to start. The Face of the Unknown by Christopher L. Bennett is also good. Lost to Eternity by Greg Cox has a neat concept, featuring a 2024 true crime podcast about the mysterious disappearance of Gillian Taylor from the movie Star Trek IV. It's a very unique idea for a Star Trek IV sequel. For Next Generation lovers, I already mentioned the book Imzadi by Peter David. I'd also recommend checking out Metamorphosis or The Devil's Heart. Those are excellent books. The autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard is rather interesting as well, although you get a lot of story that you've already seen on screen. For modern Star Trek, I highly recommend Toward the Night by James Swallow. It's a Strange New Worlds book, and I recommend it quite highly. For Deep Space Nine fans, I had fun reading Revenant by Alex White. For Star Trek Picard fans, there is a prequel book called Rogue Elements that has a really fun connection to the original series episode A Piece of the Action. It's quite an enjoyable read, even if you really don't like the Star Trek Picard series. This book is actually quite entertaining. If you want multiple novels featuring new characters, I would recommend the Vanguard series. That's a solid pick. It takes place mostly on a space station during the original 5-year mission of Captain Kirk. I also quite enjoy the USS Titan books. Those books bring in Tuvok and some other characters that you wouldn't expect. As for the 24th Century relaunch books, I hear great things about the Typhon Pact series, although I have not read them yet. I plan to get to them soon. Some fun books that aren't direct tie-ins to a specific show, I would recommend Articles of the Federation. That's a presidential political thriller. Then we have From History's Shadow. That's a fun idea. It weaves together the Ferengi landing in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, as depicted in a Deep Space Nine episode, along with the original series assignment Earth Agents. Here's one tip that I find useful. Some books are not obvious whether they're standalone or part of the relaunch series. For example, a book called Greater Than the Sum just shows a picture of the Enterprise on it with the Next Generation moniker. But this book is several books into the Next Generation relaunch post-Nemesis, but it's not obvious from looking at the book that that's what it is. If this is something important to you, I'd recommend doing a quick Google search or ask Grok or ChatGPT whether it's part of an interconnected relaunch or a standalone novel. Even the interconnected books usually give you enough context where you can jump right in. Unless it explicitly says book 3 out of 5 or whatever, you can usually just pick it up and start reading. There are not nearly as many Star Trek books published now in recent years as there were in the past. I'm not sure if there's quite the market for them that there used to be. They seem to be focusing more on quality over quantity. In my opinion, that might not be the worst thing. In my opinion, which may not be the popular opinion, I actually prefer the newer entries, the books made within the last decade or so, or at least since the turn of the century. But there are so many books, it should be easy to find one that suits what you're looking for. If you start reading and you don't care for it, don't feel bad about setting it to the side and starting another one. There are a zillion others you can choose from. Star Trek books expand the universe in personal, imaginative ways that linger long after the last page. Not all of them are good, but most are at least serviceable, and many are fantastic. If you've got a favorite I missed, hit me up in the comments. What are some of your favorite or least favorite Star Trek books? I'm a writer myself. You can find my novels on Amazon.com. If you're a science fiction guy, I'd probably start with Death Siren. Until next time, folks, Eric Wilfred Watson signing out.